transformation means literally to go beyond the current form of something. So you transform into hopefully a higher version versus a lower version of a possibility.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Abundant Coach podcast. I'm super thrilled that you're here today because we have a very, very special guest today. This is a person who has been studying transformational principles for more than 50 years, teaching it for more than 40. And the high level of respect that I have for this person is that every single day she has gotten out of bed for the last 40 years, serving not a business, not something, a goal, but a deep, deep calling to truly help people transform. And so she has written 3 best-selling books, no less than Greatness, Building Your Field of Dreams, which became a PBS special, and now the new hit, Brave Thinking. And among many, many other things, this lady has trained and certified more than 5,000 coaches worldwide to continue to spread the mission that we are more than we've known ourselves to be. So please welcome, if we could all give a round of applause on a podcast, the biggest standing ovation, Mary Morrissey.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so thrilled to be with you, Mary. So this is a podcast, as you know, for coaches who are feeling the calling but haven't yet answered that call in a physical form yet. There's coaches here who have been coaches for a long time and just want to grow more. There's coaches who are just getting their start. And so I thought, one of the most inspiring things to me that you've shared with me is a series of events that happened in 1971 that really got you to gain interest in transformation. So I'd love for you to just take us back to that time in your life and give us a picture into those 3 events that really opened your mind to a whole different way of being.
Yeah, it was October of 1971. I was 22 years old. I had 2 little boys. I was married. And I was finally, ever since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. So I finally, after getting pregnant, married, another child, was finally, now I'm in my undergraduate year. I've just started. And as I'm starting school in September of 1971, the marriage that I'd been in, we didn't know how to communicate. There was a lot of disruption and hurt in the marriage on both sides. But I was finally getting my education now, so I was happy about that. And I was thinking one day, I was in the Commons, and I was thinking, I'm just going to have to get a divorce. I'm just going to have to get a divorce. And I flipped through the Vanguard, which was the Portland State University newspaper, and saw a little ad that said wanted couples for communications encounter group. I had no idea. This is the beginnings of encounter groups, which were turned out, of course, to be personal development processing. But I didn't know what it was. But I went to the counseling center and I said, well, my husband and I are getting a divorce, but we need to communicate. So this is a communication encounter group. And they said, yeah, we're going to take 8 couples, work with them for 3 months, 12 weeks, and teach you how to communicate in good times and in not so good times. And I knew that I wanted my children to not be raised in the battlefield of our own disruption. So I said, I'll see if he'll come with me. And I went home and he did say he would come. So in the next week, we went. There were eight couples sitting in an oval with empty chairs on each end. One, the head of the psychology department from Portland State, Gene Hawkins, was sitting there. And then the other was the head of the psychiatry department at Oregon State University of Oregon Medical Center, Julia Haslow. Yeah. And it began, I'd never been in anything like this. And one of them, I don't remember which one, said, so who you're all here to learn how to communicate. What we need is one of you to tell us your story. Who's willing to go first? and nobody raised their hand. But I was in so much pain. In the family I grew up in, my mom and dad, it was such a harmonious relationship. If there was ever any tension, it would just be gone in a few minutes. There was just it was very easy. My husband, his parents, literally fought physically. I mean, the last time he was in the house, the mother chased him with a meat cleaver. I mean, it was very, very a lot of name calling and shouting. And so after we were very young, got married, I'm pregnant, and as we were beginning to have conflict, the style of conflict that he used was name calling and labeling, and I wasn't going to take that, so I matched what he was doing, and I was an equal partner in creating unhealthy conflict. And now there's all this pain and there's all this gap between us, and so I conclude I need to get a divorce. So who's going to tell their story? I raised my hand, and I saw him just put his hands on his head. I was like, oh no. So I tell my story and I tell everything that's wrong with him. My whole story was what's wrong with him. And at the end of my diatribe there, they looked at him and they said, "Have you been listening?" And he said, "You bet I've been listening. In fact, there's a few things I'd like to say." And they said, "Well, we're going to give you a chance to say everything you want to say, but not just yet. What we want to do is the first step is to make sure that Mary knows that you were listening and that you actually heard her. So, step one is just say exactly what you heard Mary say without adding any of your own story." And he could remember part of it, but a lot of it he couldn't remember that I had said. And then they pointed out to all of us a distinction, that there's a vast difference between actual listening and waiting to talk. And that being able to say to somebody, well, this is what I hear you saying, without agreement. You don't have to agree with what they said, but you need them to know that they exactly heard you. And once they pointed out to him that he hadn't been listening, I just puffed up like a peacock. Aha, I told you it's your fault. And then they turned to me and they said, "Mary, you're hurt. So your response to being hurt is to withdraw your love. When you punish someone, it's important to give them the length of time you're planning to punish them. So how long are you going to withdraw your love? Is that going to be a month, 6 months, a year, the rest of his life? When will he have paid enough for the pain you're feeling?" And I didn't know how to answer that question. And then they introduced us to some steps of how to communicate in conflict. And they were introducing the concept that conflict is not the enemy. Misuse of conflict creates a gap, destruction to relationships. On the other hand, the healthy use of conflict for deeper understanding, greater connectedness, is actually a doorway to a greater loving. And so they gave us 7 rules. First, they asked me if I would be willing to make a year commitment to this relationship. We dated 4 years. We'd been married 5 years. We had 2 kids. This is a 9-year investment. And I said, I am not willing to make a commitment to a year. And they kept whittling it down. And finally, when they said 3 months, I said 1 month. I'll work on this marriage for 1 month and then see where I am. And so we agreed. And they gave us agreements to make how we were handling conflict. No name calling, no labeling, no bringing up the past. It was seven simple rules like that. Instead, what you do is say, "This is what happened. This is how I feel about what happened. Here's what I'd love to have happen. Is that okay?" And then back and forth. So we had our first fight on the way home, but now, because that had been a pattern, but everything I would say, he'd say, "That's not fair." And if he said something, I'd say, "Well, that's not fair now." And we didn't quite know how to apply what they had given us, but we didn't know what we had agreed would be unfair. And we began to work with that. And so I've agreed now to work on the marriage for a month. That week, he heard about a lecturer who was coming to town the next weekend. And the lecturer, my husband's mother really thought we should go to hear this guy. I did not want to go, but he got up for the first, like, he was doing 2 lectures on one day. He went to the first lecture, came home and said, "You've got to hear this guy." And because I had promised to work on the relationship, I would not have gone except that I promised to work on the relationship. I went to that lecture. I remember sitting there. I'm 22, very typically pretty much sure I know everything. And uh, the lecturer said, "Nothing's bad unless you think it's bad." And I remember crossing my arms and thinking, that's just not true. There are bad things in this world. Car wrecks are bad, murder's bad, war is bad. Come on. And he said, I will agree with what you're thinking. I can tell what you're thinking, and I would agree with you. There are things in this world that we would all like to change. But here's the truth: inside everything, there is a seed of an equal or greater good. And if you will pay attention to that possibility of good, you can always pull a good out of no matter what the situation is. And so he said, here's a tool. The next time something happens and you immediately think this is bad, hit your internal pause button and wait 3 days. During that 3 days, you're not just waiting, you're turning the volume up on your curiosity of what possible good there could be in this. And so we heard that and went home. 2 days later, I had the boys at a daycare center while I was going to school, picked up the boys, came home, I'm cooking dinner. And when he came in from work that night, he just looked ashen. I went, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And he said, "There was a huge layoff at work today. 100 of us lost our jobs. I don't have a job." And I immediately, oh my gosh, then I started to move into panic. This is horrible. I mean, you don't have a job. I might have to quit school. And my mind is running like this. And then I went, wait a minute, that guy Sunday said nothing is bad unless we think it's bad. This just seems really bad. Hit your internal pause button. Where is that? I didn't even know I had that function. What's your internal pause button? Wait 3 days. It's Tuesday at 5. That'd be Friday at 5. And we're supposed to turn the volume up on our curiosity about any possible good. So we fed the kids, got them to bed, and then we sat down with a piece of paper. And he was actually way better at it than I was. He would say, one of the things he said was, well, I drive 90 minutes to and from work. That would save 3 hours of my day if I found a job closer to home. But he was a Teamster. He had a really good paying job at the time. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? And he said, well, I don't know. But if I did find a job closer to home that worked, it would be good. And then what if I worked some shorter hours? What if I made more money? And to both of those things, I go, well, how are you going to do that? I didn't know yet
Yeah.
how on hold, and just get into dream up the what you really want. And so he wrote those things down. The next day I came home and he'd found a couple of places where they were taking interviews. He was scheduled to go to the interview. Thursday, when I came home, he was whistling when I walked in the house. I said, "What? Tell me." And he had found a better paying job closer to home, inside his skill set, driving truck. Uh, and he could ride his bike to work, which he loved doing. And so a little more money, and definitely it was a route so he could do work shorter hours. And I realized that night that for the first time in my life, I hadn't suffered
Mm,
waiting for a circumstance to change before I could feel better. Because during those 3 days, whenever panic would start to rise up in me, I would say, no, Friday at 5, Friday at 5. And I had found a way to notice what I was thinking and notice that I had actually a level of authority
mm,
over what I was thinking and feeling that I'd never known before. So that interested me. I went the next week. Nothing really struck me except that there was a workshop that would be the following week, which I went to. This is all now in October of 71. And the person who was doing that lecture was a man named Richard Alpert was his birth name. He became Ram Dass, was a student of Hinduism and other things, and he was talking about how the mind is the generator. The thoughts that we think have everything to do with the results we're going to create. That next week in class, I was taking a class called Concepts of Nature.
mm.
So Ram Dass and this concepts of nature class came together, and they introduced me to Ralph Waldo Emerson
Mm,
and Transcendentalism. And I realized, oh, that's what happened when I hit the pause button. There was a part of me that was bigger or more than the circumstances I was having. And I was beginning to relate to that part and be so that I could experience a life that had circumstances,
yes.
but it didn't control my whole life. I actually could decide what I was going to do with that and it come from a more intelligent space inside myself. And I just began to be like Lauren, like a thirsty sponge
Oh,
for
yeah.
everything I could find in the field of transformation. And that's what occurred in 1971. And I've been
So,
studying every day since then.
I mean, wow, in 1 month, the things that occurred, I think I've heard you describe it before as like drinking out of a fire hose of this new way of thinking.
It was, and
So,
I was just like, oh my gosh, I felt like I had come out of like I'd been living in the attic of myself, and I was just buffeted by, what my programming said. This is good, this is bad, this is hard, this is horrible. Uh, and now I began to develop a sense of I get to choose what I'm going to think about. And no longer was life happening to me. I realized life was happening with me. And yeah, it was just, and I was, I turned into a minor evangelist at this point, wanting everybody I knew to have this because it was so freeing and life giving, and telling my parents and telling my friends. And I asked my best friend, have you ever noticed patterns going on in your life? And it was spooky to her. And she was, what do you mean patterns? And my parents were going, look, Mary got religion. If this is working for you, good, but you don't need to come every time you're coming over here asking us to think this way or read these books. And so I realized that trying to push it on people was not the way to bring transformation, that it would be more important that I study and I let my life show what this does. And then some will be interested and some aren't. And that's what I've seen over the last 50 plus years. Some are interested and some aren't. But today we're in a world where way, way more people are interested in transforming their lives in a degree in order to experience a life that they love in one or more areas.
I was wondering as you were talking about going to the communication group, it's 1971. I'm wondering if in either your family or your kid's dad's family, that at that time there was a stigma around going to counseling or going to therapy or going to a group session like that. Was there a feeling of, oh, only people who are troubled do these kind of things? Because I think that, I mean, I was born in the 80s, but I think there was still a stigma around working on yourself, so to speak.
It was just that the environment I was in was so conducive. If
Mm,
I
mm,
had been a stay-at-home mom and I hired a therapist, I think I would have encountered that.
sure.
But I had we had 8 other couple, we had 7 other couples who were in the same class with us.
Yeah,
It was a class more than a therapy.
I see. Yeah.
That was how it was perceived. I was getting my degree both in education and psychology at the same time. So these explorations were just part of the curriculum. So
Which
it was
is powerful.
acceptable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very powerful. So I'm thinking about coaches in particular. And each of the three things that you shared happened in 1971. You can take and put on top of things that happen in the everyday course of building your coaching business, wanting to help people. I think about the communication. Let me just start by saying, when I heard these stories from you over the course of my time working with you, Mary, I had never heard anything like it before. I mean, I felt the same way you felt in October 1971. You share these stories, and I felt like my DNA got rearranged in my body. Like it was a whole different, it was like a technicolor world. Like Dorothy opens the door, and then here it is all of a sudden in color. And I think that as a coach, one of the ways that we can apply that first tool of you don't have to agree to listen is, I remember very specifically a time when a client or a prospective client, I don't even think she was a client, I think it was a prospective client who had had a session with me, who felt like I pushed her. And I was surprised because I was like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. That was not my intention. And I remember that story that you told, that you don't have to agree you can show you're listening without having to agree by repeating back to the person what you heard them say.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
was such a powerful moment because I got on the phone with her and I just said, tell me everything you felt. I really want to hear how this was for you. And she told me, and it wasn't like that was easy because of course I was like, one, I didn't say that. Two, in my mind, I'm thinking I didn't say that. And then I remembered, no, I'm just supposed to listen. It doesn't mean I'm agreeing. And when I repeated back to her nearly, identical to the words she said, because you had trained me in that, she actually said to me, when I hear you say it back to me, it actually wasn't as bad as I was making it. Now that I hear it back, it feels really harsh, and I don't think it was that harsh. And so we didn't even have to have really any much more conversation because she felt heard. And I listened fully to what she said, and I didn't say anything other than what she said. And she was happy just for being heard that I listened. And so as coaches, I think, especially in the world where we might put ourselves out there on social media and someone could comment something or someone feels something about what we did, what a powerful tool to just be able to listen without feeling like you have to respond with your side of the story. Just
Right. This is what so can I let you know what I'm hearing?
yes.
And sometimes as they're speaking, you might be not quite hearing everything. So would you tell me more? Those three words, tell me more. Please tell me more. Yeah. Um, about, so I can really understand this part. And when you come into a conversation, really seeking to understand,
Mm,
the other person is going to feel more and more understood.
yes.
And that creates a bridge and a connection, whether you ever work with them or not.
Yes. Because they can feel that you're coming from an energy of openness and understanding and connection, as opposed to I can't wait to defend what I what I I think too the internal pause
There's a
button.
human side to us that may have a little of that going on, but we just set it aside long enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the pause button too for coaches, as we're building a business, there's going to be all sorts of ups and downs and curveballs and things that we didn't expect. And we hear coaches say, I did everything I could and nobody came to my workshop, or I had 5 sessions in a row and no one wanted to coach with me. And what a powerful tool to use the internal pause button around that and not make it into something. Um, I'm just reflecting on these tools. We live what we teach. We live what we teach.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. So now let's fast forward. So it's 1971. You have this amazing experience, this awakening, and then you didn't teach the work until 1981.
Right. I spent a decade, I invested a decade in getting a master's degree in counseling psychology, attending a 2-year seminary, and then begin to experiment with writing and teaching, creating classes that I would teach before I opened up a teaching center where I would teach these principles. Because I really felt strongly that I needed to have lived enough of these to know how it really worked in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, transformation means literally to go beyond the current form of something. So you transform into hopefully a higher version versus a lower version of a possibility. Um, and then I began, and I worked. It was uh, very, very slowly did this work grow. It took a lot, and I along the way, I did everything I knew to do. I was doing therapy during the week or at $30 an hour in 1980 and 81 to generate the money that would help pay for the facility that I would use on Sundays for this teaching work. And the only way I knew how to teach transformation in those days was through church. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we did coaching in those days. If you ask somebody and they said they're a coach, you would say, "Well, what sport?" Because the idea of coaching in business or in personal development or in any of the other kinds of endeavors was not a profession that was on the table. We
Mm-hmm.
hadn't developed that yet. So I incorporated and opened up an independent, non-denominational church, very little, took in 4 years of it. There were at the most 30, 40, 50 people sometimes. And I had stories in my head about why I wasn't successful. One was that they only had metal chairs, and I mean, who wants to every week come and sit in a metal chair, a foldable metal chair? The place was the Oddfellows Hall, and it was old and curling linoleum at the edges of the walls, and with yucky looking. And I didn't have money for advertising, so the bad linoleum, the metal chairs, and the no money for advertising. I was barely paying my portion. By now, we have 4 kids, and my portion of the income that I'm and then supporting this fledgling work. Um, yeah, I just had this pattern of thinking, well, the reason we're not growing is that. And then I met a man who became a mentor to me. And I'd been listening in those days, it was cassette tapes. I had been listening to some cassette tapes by him. Uh, and I just knew that he understood, first of all, his expression of success was at so much a higher level than mine. We'd studied the same things. I could hear that. His way of describing it was really pristine and clarified. Um, but he had hundreds and hundreds of people coming to his work. He was on radio and TV in the Detroit and Northeast area. Um, and I got myself to a seminar that he was leading on church growth and development in Chicago with 2 other teachers. And I didn't go there to have him be a mentor to me. I went there to sit in his presence, and then I wanted to ask him some questions. And that's really why I went. I got myself an airplane. It was a big deal as a mom of 4 little kids, and my husband had inherited a berry farm, and he's berry farming, and I'm trying to create a different path for us. And I go get myself there and hear him speak. He speaks Friday night. His name Jack Boland, and he spoke Friday night. And I was so enamored by the way he could articulate the same kind of message I was giving, but at a different whole level. And I stood in line till the end, and then thanked him. And then I asked him, I said, any way I can buy you breakfast tomorrow? And he looked at me and he said, we're in a 3-day seminar. I can't go to breakfast with you. And then he paused. And I don't know what happened in that moment, but he said, you know what? If you get yourself to the cafe at 7 a.m., I'll give you 30 minutes. And so of course, I was in that booth when he came down at 7 a.m. and he said, how can I help you? And I said, I want to do what you're doing. And he looked at me and he goes, I can help you with that, but it's going to cost you. And when he said that to me, my body actually went backwards. I mean, I said, well, how much? And he goes, oh, that's your problem. You actually think how much something costs has anything to do with what you want. And I'm sure my eyes darted back and forth, and I went, well, yeah, everybody I know thinks that same way. I have to know how much it costs before I know if I can do it. And he says, I'm telling you, that's your problem. He might as well have been speaking Martian to
Yeah.
me at the time. I had no idea really what he was talking about. Um, and then he described that he was creating a mentoring program that would be 1 year long. He already had 2 male people he had selected who were upcoming teachers. He heard about I told him about my work and that I wanted to move it to a whole new level. And he said, I've been thinking there might be a woman that I would bump into this weekend who really had a passion for bringing the work to a much larger expression. And I think you're that person. Then he told me that the price for the year-long mentoring was $19,000. Now, this is 1987, equivalent of just over $50,000 today. I mean, I'm a mom. I've got 4 kids. I've got a fledgling little ministry. I'm funding it with counseling I'm doing. I mean, this was beyond. I said, well, there's no way I can do that. And he said, well, what if there were? And he says, and what if by your investing in it, what you could do with what you had a year from now, it would be easy to finish that payment because of the growth and the development and the expression of your work. And then he asked me, he said, there's a deposit of $2,500. And I said, well, I took everything I had just to get here. And he said, well, don't you have a rainy day fund somewhere? Then I thought here he just, in my mind, he just turned into a used car salesman. It's like, you're just trying to sell me. I thought you were this guy, and now you're just trying to sell me. And he said, so notice that you're very protective of saving that $2,500 for something you don't want. You don't want the car to break down or the roof to leak, but you're not willing to invest that in an expansion of your work and life and income that'll grow with that. So notice that choice. You've been trained to think you have to have this.
Mhm.
What if you could be trained to think that you actually can go for what you want? And something happened in that moment. I realized he knew how to create much larger work than I had any idea how to create. And he had a long track record. It wasn't that he just knew, he had a long track record of that. And I
I
also
also.
could feel that he cared.
Mm.
I always tell people when you're looking for a mentor, you want someone who understands how things occur. They don't think they're random and,
You know,
accidentally you bumped into something. It was just an accident. There's invisible laws that govern how things occur, just like gravity, electricity. So he understood this, and he had a long track record in creating his success. And I didn't want his success. I wanted my success, that what my calling was. And then he had a deep caring. I could tell that he cared about me having my results. And so I made that move. And then I never looked back. I studied with him not just 1 year. Oh, and then next thing he said is, now you got to be in Detroit next weekend. And I went, there's no way I can get you. I took everything I have to get here. And he says, then I can't help you.
Mm.
To Detroit next weekend because we're launching the mentoring program, and the two men that I'm going to mentor are going to be there, and you have to be there if you're going to be in this group. So guess what? I found a way to do it.
That's right.
I was in Detroit, and I went in and sat down in a conference room and with two men. I met Wayne, I met Les. Then Jack Boland came in, sat down, and introduced me to Les Brown, Wayne Dyer, and Mary Morrissey. And he mentored us not just that year, but we all renewed each year. And for 5 years, he was my mentor along with theirs. We became very good friends, the three of us. And then Jack died. The investment I made in working with him has been with me. He's been gone since '92. So it's been decades now. But that investment keeps yielding and yielding and yielding
Yeah.
benefits in my life, and has informed and inspired the coaching work that I do in the world.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So powerful. So powerful. So when you said back to Jack, everybody I know thinks this way. You got to know how much something is before you can know if you can have it or not. I think, and you're changing this, Mary, and my mission is to change this, but I think so many people still think that way. And this is why you founded Brave Thinking Institute.
It is.
Yeah.
There's, you remember, I was introduced to Transcendentalism early
Yes.
on in 1971. So in Transcendentalism, um, the idea that you have circumstances, but circumstances don't have to have you. So it's not like you don't know what your current money is, but you don't yet know what the investment in the learning and the growth might bring to you.
Right.
So you need someone who understands how that can make a huge difference in your life. So as a coach, it's important that we are informed about what really brings transformation into people's life, not just I'm a trained therapist. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. The modalities I was trained in the 80s, 70s, late 70s, were all pretty much reflective
Mm.
thinking.
Mhm.
It would look backwards on, oh, I'm this way. So I've been afraid of water my whole life. And then you go back and perhaps through some regression or hypnosis, you find out that when you were 9 months old, you were a slippery little body and slipped out of her hands and put your head underwater, and you got jolted with a big fear, and it's still operating in you. So finding out why you're afraid of water doesn't change that you are afraid of water. That's transformation. So sometimes it's helpful to be informed. Most of the time, you don't even really have to know where it came from, just that you want to change it.
Yes.
So the idea of transcendentalism introduces us to two kinds of thinking. One is what is in Henry David Thoreau's work called common hour thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Common hour thinking, which is just what I had when I sat with Jack Boland. Of course, I have to know how much something costs before I know if I can have it. And he says, I'm telling you, you got this backwards. Decide what you want without the price, whatever the price is,
Mm-hmm.
if it's something you really want. So when I knew I wanted to veer out of just the enclosure of only being a minister and really take a work that would go way beyond the walls of any church, um, that move, it was new territory for me. But I didn't let the circumstances control me. Once I knew what I really wanted to do, I began to move towards it, uh, thinking that there has to be a way to do it. We're in a sea of infinite possibilities. If we think it's going to be hard or we think it's going to be easy, there's a high tendency there's going to be exactly what we think it's going to be.
So I'm glad that you brought this up, Mary, because I often think to myself, I mean, the deep level of admiration I have for you is I've only been doing this going on, I think I'm 7 years, almost 7 years in now. And I know the rigor that it takes to get out of bed and serve the calling. That's only going on 7 years. And then I think about someone who's gotten out of bed every day for 40 plus years and served the calling and the rigor that that took. And one of the things that comes to my mind often is there was a time in, I want to say 2004, tell me if I'm correct, that you lost the work you'd done in the world.
I
And
had I'd stayed married to my kid's dad. That we were going to get a divorce. We're going to work on it 1 month. Well, that
yeah,
turned into another 21 years in our marriage. We were married 27 years, had two more wonderful kids. And we were kids. I was 17 when we married. He was 19. And as we matured and grew and got, more interested in our own professions, we were just not on the same wavelength. What he thought was fun and funny and what I thought was fun were very different. What really mattered to us, other than our kids, we were 100% united in our raising our kids. And then after 27 years, we freed each other to go on to the next stages of our life. We are still very dear friends. We're at all our kids' events together. We hug. We're grateful. We talk on the phone. The friendship was always the best part of that
yeah,
relationship for me. And that we saved that. So I'm very grateful for that. Then a few years later, I met and married a man who was a CPA who was consulting as our church grew and we were getting a new property. And I met him, dated him a couple of years, fell in love, married. I knew he had depression disorder when I married him, but I had no idea how far it went and how deep it was. Uh, and The first maybe 4 years of our marriage was actually pretty good, and then he became more and more reclusive and depressed, and he was operating. The board had given him a key position in the financial management of our church and turning in the financials every month that the board and I would review. I was busy at this time working with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and speaking at the UN, and my book had become a PBS special, and I was very busy. And then there came a moment when I realized um, something's wrong financially here. It didn't
mm,
matter how much money we raised, it was never enough. And I went outside what he was doing and got some independent uh, CPAs and attorneys to look at what was going on. And they sat me down and they said, "You have a very big problem. There's been embezzling here. There's been probably $1 million taken out of the church. And when one thing after another happened and came out, ultimately I would have to close the work that I had built for 23 years." Uh, and I was devastated. He went to a mental hospital for a year, then pled guilty and went to prison. I divorced in the process. It wasn't just that he was mentally ill, it was that he had a capacity to, over the time when I would have questions, that he could look me right in the eye and lie about it. And a lot of people have bipolar disease, but not all of them have that same expression where they can just look you in the eye and lie right to your face, and other people too. A lot of people got hurt. I was one of those. But at the end of the day, the congregants, I was part of that. We had put money into this facility. So it was a trust that owned the property, and there was a $10 million debt to congregants on that trust. And when the attorneys came in and bankrupted everything, I personally felt a spiritual responsibility to my congregants. I knew that They didn't just trust the church, they trusted me. I was a senior minister. I had started this work. And I just couldn't make peace with bankrupting those congregants. So I put an escrow fund together in the state of Oregon where we were. Everything that could get sold got sold. And I said, I'm either going to get this $10 million paid back, bring this to a zero balance, or I will spend the rest of my life attempting. And once I made that decision, I could feel it wasn't easy, but I could feel at peace with that decision. And I didn't start any new work right away. I was just bereft. I went to the Oregon coast, found a place to stay, and I gave my last sermon. It was broadcast all over the Northwest. And then the next Sunday, I had no place to go.
Mm.
After 3 years, I'd get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and get ready for the day and be the first person in the church, filling it with love. And there was just no place to go. He's in a mental institute. I mean, there's all this still swirling. So I went to the Oregon coast to walk the beach that afternoon, which has always been a calming place for me. And I knew one afternoon was not going to do it. So I found a place to stay and I stayed 90 days and I walked that beach. I pounded that beach every day. But in the first 5 or 6 weeks, I just sobbed and cried. I was bereft. I would, get angry. I was angry at him. I was angry at the other CPA who was supposed to be watching over it and they weren't. But ultimately, I was angry with myself because in hindsight, as you have hindsight, it was like, oh, I could have seen that. I could have seen that. I could have seen that. And I ultimately got myself to realize that I didn't want to see it. I could have seen it, but I didn't want to see it because as a public person, I was afraid of a second divorce more than seeing the truth. That was very expensive to allow that fear to govern my way of being. I took with me on that beach walk, all those beach walks. I was reading a book called Dark Night of the Soul by a Christian mystic who wrote that probably in 1100 AD. And I remember particularly, Lauren, one spot, and might be helpful to anybody who's listening to this who is in a dark place or has been in a dark place. He says, when the dark night comes upon you, the first thing you do is try to get it to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find out your power is not enough to make it go away, I mean, somebody you love dies. I mean, a work dies. This was my baby, 23 years, and it crashed and burned with scandal all around it.
Mm-hmm.
When the dark night and what disease, there's just so many things that we all deal with certain things. And there's no, well, that was much worse than this. No, it's whatever's worse. That's where we are. So when the dark night comes upon you, the first thing you do is try to make it go away. When you realize your power is not enough to make it go away, it's here. You can't change it. It's happened. When you come to that moment, if you surrender, three things will happen. First is a feeling of relief because you've stopped fighting it. I can't change this. This has happened. Somebody I love has passed. I can't get them back. Or whatever the deep dark night seems to be for you. You feel a sense of release. Relief because you set it down. Release because you're no longer fighting it.
Mm-hmm.
Third thing, he says, and the third thing that will happen is a strange feeling that will come upon you that you actually don't want it to end too soon because you actually do want everything it came to give you.
Mm.
Now, that was not an easy place for me to get.
Right.
I mean, I was still arguing in my mind how it shouldn't have happened and this and that. But eventually, I'm walking down the beach, probably 6 weeks, 7 weeks into the 90 days. And I'm walking one day, and that particular hour, I'm not crying. I'm just walking. And I hear, dark chapter, not your whole book. And that was the first moment when I thought, you mean I can write more chapters? Dark chapter, not your whole book. Oh, it started with saying, you're still breathing.
Mm.
And then I heard, dark chapter, not your whole book. And that was the first opening. It'd been so dark. That was the first light shining through that there could be more chapters. There could be more. Because I knew in that moment that one thing had, no matter what the form of the work I had done, one thing absolutely had not changed. And that was how much I loved helping people and see them really get help, to realize that they were more than their stories, more than their circumstances, that they had in them a power that was greater than anything that's outside them.
Mm.
And so just one little thing after another started happening for me, and I began to do very small work. At one point, I decided I had been invited, and I was going up to Seattle once a week to speak at a smaller church, who was asking me to do that. Driving home, I guess the second week we were doing that with a couple of my friends we'd all lost our jobs because the church
Yeah.
had closed. Um, and I realized, oh, I need to make myself available to that. I had 2,000 to 3,000 people coming every Sunday,
Mhm.
and now that everything's closed, I need to make myself available to those people, because all they could see was what's in the newspaper. One of the headlines was I'd gone from being on the front page of the Oregonian, the newspaper in my state, to from Mary Mary at the UN, Mary with the Dalai Lama, Mary with the PBS special, profit for profit.
Mm.
Um, Nobody was publishing Bipolar Husband. It was, embezzlement at her church and this and that.
Mm.
So I thought, I need to get with them. They need to get mad at me, accuse me, yell at me, whatever they need to do, because there's no way they can have access to me.
Mhm.
So I did this little place that, it brought several hundred people at a time. And we just sent words out, and then they knew people, and word went out that I was doing this every Tuesday night. I didn't want to do anything on Sundays because there'd been 5 little churches that had sprung out of the ashes of the work I had built. And I would do a little service. I said, we're going to have a short service here at the end of which I will stay for any question you want to ask. I'll stay as long as you have questions, and no questions out of bound. And at first, the first like 2 to 3 months were just full of accusation. And how
Mm.
could you not have known? I mean, here you are. I mean, and I understood from where they were standing that I wasn't, but the board and I both were exonerated of, there were CPAs putting in our hands uh, financials. They were CPA approved. We had a right to believe what was handed to us, but it didn't change the results.
Mhm.
Stood in it and stood in it and stood in it, and then the questions were fewer and fewer, and but they still wanted that service. So a much smaller group, of course, than the 3,000 people. This was more like 400 people
Mhm.
who were coming, and they called it Sabbath Tuesdays. And I would do that while I was traveling, building work now that had just the little sproutings of being a coaching business. Now,
So,
eventually, they had no questions left. And yeah, I did that for 3 years while I was building my
wow.
new, yeah.
So I want to just really highlight this for coaches. So, at the level of fact to Mary, it can seem like she's lost everything:
Mhm.
marriage, house, church, people who used to believe in you going, oh, the newspaper talking about you. And if I'm calculating correctly, you're 55 years old at the time ish,
Exactly.
right? 55 years old.
Yeah, temptation to go crawl under a rock was very present.
Yes, yes, because I'm thinking about many times our coaches that we train and certify are in the range of 50s and 60s, and they're saying to themselves, am I really going to do something new? And I think about this and I think, okay, you've lost everything. It seems like 55 years old, but there was a part of you who made this decision that you were going to somehow, you had no idea how, but it felt important to you to commit to pay this $10 million back.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
there's a
And
power move here.
it looked like a mountain that was not achievable at first. And then, of course, applying the principles that we apply, I um, I began to realize nothing can be bigger than God. Nothing can be bigger than God. Um, and there's a power breathing me. So I just need to do the thing I can do with what I have. I made an agreement to pay 15% of the gross dollars that I earned. Now, That doesn't sound like very much, but I had moved now to California, and you earn $1, you pay 15% off the top, but you pay 37% and another 14% of taxes on the full dollar, which meant I would have 33 cents in the dollar that I earned after I put 15% to my Oregon debt and paid the taxes that were mine to pay. And my first thought is, how am I going to live on 33 cents? And thoughts came to me, well, then you got to earn a whole lot of 33 cents.
Yeah, yeah,
I just began a small and growing work, but the vision I held, and this is, I think, important for all of our coaches, uh, to have a vision of what your work thriving looks like. Have a
yeah,
crystal clear vision of what a work that you want to do and you feel called to do is what does it look like when it's thriving?
hmm,
And you hold that in mind, even though you're looking at whatever looks like so small, but you keep that vision in your mind and you do the thing you can do with what you have from where you are. The thing that I believe is the distinguisher in the work that we do together, Lauren, and that I've done is Jack Boland told me early on, the reasons lots of people get into, either writing books or being somebody known in the personal development world, and then they fade out, they fizzle out after a few years, and you'll see a lot of those.
hmm,
I've been doing this work now for, like Lauren said, 40 years. Even with the big smashing failure right in the middle of it, it wasn't long and then it's all sprouting again. And he said, and I believed it, and is that it's the love you have for people. If that's authentic, if you're just trying to make a bunch of money, you can make a lot of money in coaching. You can travel, you can work from any place in the world. There's so many benefits. But if your primary interest is on authentically helping people, they
yeah,
can feel that. Like I could feel with Jack Boland.
yes,
And that's really the energy that goes before you and helps attract people to your work because they can feel that you care. And that has to be authentic, not something you just put on when you're on a stage and then behind the stage you're something else.
yeah,
And the
yeah,
other I think for our coaches is to recognize it's okay to be transparent about your own learnings. That in my bio it says my two favorite, after all the degrees that I've earned, my two favorite degrees are two black belts I've earned, one in success and one in failure,
yeah,
and they were equally instructive to my growth. And I would hold in mind as the image I'm writing that last check to Oregon. I imagined that it was going to be about 1,200,000. So my work had to grow quite a bit before I started really whittling it down. And it turned out it was 1,700,000 was the last check I wrote. But for years I'd been imaging at least once a day that I'm writing that last check.
yes,
Did get it done in my lifetime. Uh, and the feeling of now I get this note that I'm at zero balance. So I started in 2004. And I actually accomplished that in 2000, was it 17 or 18? So it's not been that long. Yeah.
yeah. I think the big power message in that is, even in the face of losing seemingly everything, there was a part of you that said, spiritually, this feels right for me to pay this back, or to
Mm.
try, to die trying if I have to. That the decision was made that this is what you're going to do before there's any, I have a new work, or I know how I'm going to make money. I mean, there was none of that yet.
No.
And it's similar to the same thing that coaches, all of these coaches who are listening right now, they're going through I have a heart to help people. I have a spark in me. At some level, I don't have any idea how I'm going to do it. But notice that Mary made the decision first, the
Hmm.
decision that she was going to do this thing, because the one thing that she felt like she hadn't lost was she still wanted to help people.
Hmm.
And that is, for me personally, when I said, even only doing this 6 or 7 years, there can be a rigor to getting up and doing this and serving this calling every morning. But it's easier when I remind myself of why I'm doing it, because I know the call is to help people. I've felt that call since I was a little girl.
Hmm.
And for many of you listening, I know you felt a similar call in some regard to the difference that you want to make. So let's take a page out of Mary's book here and not have to know how it's all going to work out, But just know that if we get up serving the call with the decision already being made, that's what's going to keep us sustainable in this business.
That's right.
Yes, yes. So I have a few questions I'd like to ask you, Mary, that are very common that come up for our coaches. So I'll just do like what do you call it? A lightning round here of questions that often come up for coaches. So the first one is, how am I ever going to get my first clients?
How am I ever going to get my coaching clients?
Yes, it feels like insurmountable to actually somehow find a way to get clients.
Yeah. So notice the word get. Get is in the frequency of lack. So I understand we're thinking these thoughts. They're common to be thinking. So here's the deal. If you are giving versus getting, people will flock to you. So doing podcasts, putting yourself out there, we train in doing having a workshop that you do. You can do it online. You can do it. There was one of our coaches, Lauren, who came Mexico City. He'd been trying to do some things. The most he'd ever earned was $7,000 in a year. A period. He was living with his mother. He had dreams of, having his own home, getting married, having children. And he came and he went through our basic coach certification training. And we trained him in how to do a small workshop that helps people simply get in touch with a vision for what they would love, and how to codify that, how to have it be crystal clear enough that it had a sense of, oh, I would love that. And then introduce them to some simple things they can do to help make it happen. And that's a give. It's just completely given. And then if you're interested in more, or you're interested in support in actually executing on this, we can have a conversation. So it was full of giving and full then of invite into greater possibilities. The first time he delivered this online, now I think there were maybe he did his best to get people there. I think there were 27 people there. But when it was all said and done, I think he made $30,000 of clients who were investing $3,000 apiece. I think 10 of them enrolled to work with him. He came down to dinner and he realized that he was doing what he would love doing. He'd help people who just even attended that workshop that night. And now he'd enrolled 10 clients he got to work with. But it wasn't about getting clients. The whole thrust is about giving value, giving value, giving value. And you clients will absolutely be drawn to you.
I love that. So true. And you can tell when someone's in a get energy. If you go to a networking meeting or you go somewhere and someone's just, looking around, you can really feel that, and it's off-putting.
It
And
is
so
off-putting.
when you're the person who's giving, that's, I think, why, as you're saying, people flock to you, because it's like, well, I want what they're having. That looks
I
warm and
feel good
fuzzy.
around them. The
Yes.
other piece, feel good when you're around them. Yeah.
Yes. And then people want more of that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I notice as I work with coaches is that there can be a tendency for some to spin their wheels doing things that don't really produce income or impact. Like, I'm working on my logo and I'm working on this flyer and I'm working on this. And when all of that's done, then I'll somehow start putting myself out there. So what would you say to the person who's working really hard, but it's not producing impact? How would you help them get started in a way that's actually going to help people?
Just, it could be a simple move. Often we do that because we're not confident yet about putting ourselves in front of people, or the rejection that might come if somebody says no. So remember, your win isn't whether they say yes or no. Your win is that you're giving them information and support to become awake to what they would really love in their life, what's working, what's not working. So one of the things I train in, and did myself, when nothing seemed to be happening. Yes, we were going to build a website, but that I knew that was a framework. It wasn't the work. I made at least 3 phone calls a day to people that I was not in the work. I was around the work unless I was making at least 3 phone calls a day to people that um, either I'd met at a networking, just checking in on you. I mean, and you're remembering what they said. I remember you were saying you were going to be doing this, and I just want to check in, see how you're doing. And pretty soon, because you're giving support, you're going to see more and more coming back to you. So without making 3 phone calls a day at least, I would say you're not in the work, you're around the work. Yeah, you're gonna build a website and you are gonna have a logo, but that's not driving your business.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the service piece. If
Mhm.
if we're thinking about how we might get rejected or we might not know what to say or these things that are very normal, but they put the focus on us, and of course our nervous system's going to get triggered because at the level of fact that could happen. I could get rejected or someone could not like what I'm doing. But if I put the focus on how can I serve,
Mhm, mhm.
it's way
And some will like
easier.
it and some won't. That's okay. This I finally it took me years, Lauren, to come to the place where I knew in my bones, it's okay for people to say no to me. But it's not okay for me to know a system that's gonna really help them have a life they love and not at least put it in front of them. Let them say no, that's okay. But it's not okay for me to hold it back because maybe they won't like me. That's that's not who I came to be and what I believe really serves. It's okay if they say no. Some will say yes, some will say no. That's the nature of it. But the more you put it in front of people with you really sincerely caring about helping them, the more your work will grow.
It's interesting. It's like you said in the beginning, you wanted everybody to have it, and your parents were like, "Oh, this is kind of." It's funny because I mean, I had heard that you had shared that with me from the beginning of my training, so I trusted that. Okay, if I just live this work enough, people will get interested, in my family or in my friends group. And so some of my friends, they were willing to help me with the work. Like I'll do the sign-in sheet or I'll do whatever, but they weren't really interested in the personal development until they wanted something. Like I had a friend who wanted a new house, and she's looking at me, experiencing all this growth. So one day she sends me a text message and she says, "This is 5 years in, Mary. So I've already built a multi-million-dollar business. I've, spoken on stages and all this." And she sends me a text message and she says, "Do you know anything about manifesting?" Question mark. And I said, I do happen to know something about that. Why do you ask? And she said, "Well, I have this dream of having a house, but I don't know how to get it." And I remember thinking in that moment, Mary said this. You live the work, you put it out there, you do your workshops, you give as much as you can, give value, and people will get interested. And whether it takes them that first workshop or 5 years later, do you know anything
Right.
about manifesting?
Everybody's got their own growing season.
All right, one final question for you, Mary. If you were a coach starting from scratch today, so we just take away everything. We take away your email list and all of that and your contacts and everything, and you're going to start a business brand new. What would be your first move?
When I started fresh, in 2004 and 5, podcasts had not even been developed. That might be a good way to start with giving value, coming up with possibly what would you do with you did a webinar and what value would you give people and what would you want them to leave with, so that you have something that you've put together. That's why when we train coaches, we give them a vision, a workshop to help people clarify and get crystal clear. Once the woman knew she wanted a house, she was willing to take some different action.
Yes.
And most people, they're so busy dealing with what's coming at them that they don't get help really paying attention to what's seeking to come from them and then show them how you can serve. That's what coaching is. You help them identify what it is that really matters to them, and then you coach them into having the results that are a match for what they want. And so I would discover what my unique way of teaching or helping people discover what it is they really want. That's step one before anyone's going to make a move to hire you as a
Mm.
coach. They have to identify what they really want. And you can do that on podcasts, you can do that in webinars, you can do that in mailings. You do have a mailing list. Everybody has a mailing list. It's everybody they know.
Yes.
You can invite them to something that is easy. We've got Zoom today. We didn't have Zoom.
Yeah.
The years I was developing, it's just so much easier really to get in front of people. And you can just start attending some networking events and really hear the longing in people and what would serve them. So you're gaining information and insight yourself.
Love that.
How do
Mary,
you answer that question, Lauren?
how would I answer it? Yeah, I would, very similar. I would go to every networking event around and just really hold state with people. Just really listen to what's going on with them. If it seemed, online, I'd invite them into something, whether it's a conversation or a workshop. But I think the first mission I'd make is go network and just really be there with people
Learn. Yeah,
and learn. Yeah.
that's cool.
So, Mary Morrissey, I would love to talk to you for another 2 hours or 3 or 4 or 6. I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I'm going to invite everybody to go to bravethinkinginstitute.com. That's where you can find Mary. You can follow her on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, Mary Morrissey. Mary, thank you. Thank you for everything you bring to all of us. It's just such a gift.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren, for your great work in the world and all the people that you're helping as well. It's a privilege to work with you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you never miss a new upload. You can help our channel continue to grow as we invest in creating more great content for coaches. Lastly, check the description below for helpful links to the resources mentioned in this video. Thank you and have an amazing day.